going, guys? I'm Kaz with the Hyperloops again. Yeah, I don't know if this is Patreon or website. I think Patreon's much better. I like you guys better. So what I want to talk about again is some more efficiency, and really taking a look at cards as a whole. So I will start with upgrades, and if I talk for way too long, we might have to go to a second part of upgrades. But if it ends up being short, then we might be able to get into like supports or upgrades. But just to quickly go over efficiency for anyone that is relatively newer, the expectation in this game is that if a card, or for like, let's say like damage or healing wise, we're expecting to get 1 damage or 1 heal for 0 in a card, 0 resources. We're expecting to get 2 for 1 resource, you know, i.e. field medic, lightsaber throw. Examples of the first one would be like rejuvenate, take cover because of the shield. I can't think of anything that would cost 0 and actually does 1 damage, but there's ways to shift stuff around. For 2, we're kind of expecting 3. So like, as you can see from the new legacy stuff, we have Mend, which is 2 resources to heal 3. We have Heightened Awareness, which is 2 resources to get 3 shields, and they tossed in Ambush just because shields are actually better, worse than healing. You kind of think like My Ally is the Force. Any of those cards that kind of the sensor placement, not reversal, but there's lots of cards that do stuff like that. So the expectation is that roughly you're gonna pay 2 resources for 3 damage. Any of those 2-cost ones that like, alright, take my opponent's 2 damage and hit them with it, that's kind of giving you 4, because it's gonna deal 2 to them and prevent 2 from you. Entangle, you're pretty much stopping 3 value worth, so you can kind of think of just 3 damage. Mind Trick, you're probably taking out 2 dice minimum, or aiming for like the big damage die, depending on how they end up setting up. So yeah, like the rough expectation is you're gonna go 2 for 3, and then after that kind of is just like crazy shit that either is kind of complete blowout or poop. So like Decisive Blow for 3. You're resolving your damage, so this is already like a hard requirement, but you're blowing out all of the dice of whatever person you hit. So if your opponent's fully equipped, we're talking, 5 dice for 3, and you had to have a damage to resolve, which is very tough. But the expectation is like that could be upwards of 6, 7, 8, damage plus. Or sorry, 6, 7, 8 damage because you're not taking it. I'm trying to think like the 2-cost things like dodge, defend, block, dive. Each of those, realistically, you'd probably cast it if it saved you from like 3 or 4 damage. So like that's the overall expectation for roughly 2 resources. In the situations for stopping specific types of damage, well, you might be thinking, well, why is it getting like 4? Like, wouldn't that just be better? And yes, 4 would be better than 3 if we took into consideration, like, don't take into consideration that it's very specific. Because Mind Trick, pretty much your opponent would have to make piles that let you take their damage. Dive, defend, and then the original Awakening variations are only 1 type of damage. So it's kind of one of those things where Heightened Awareness or Mend is just a flat 3, because you're putting 3 shields or getting 3 health back, whereas the other ones required specific types. So that's the rough estimate there for events, but it's very different when we look at upgrades. So now, since the dawn of time, the upgrades we essentially used to have to compare stuff to was, in the 1-cost slot, it was DH-17. In the 2-cost slot, it was Holdout Blaster. And then in the 3-cost slot, it was actually Lightsaber. And now the reasonings we always compared to these was because redeploy was a very strong mechanic in general. And if you're paying 2 or 3 for an upgrade, the thinking was that you didn't want to have your guy die and have it go away. So whilst we had upgrades that didn't have redeploy, it was one of those things where the die needed to essentially be much better than this redeploy die. Otherwise, it would just never make the cut. And then DH was just kind of filthy in general. So if we take a look at DH, we've got, it costs 1 resource to play, and we've got 1 damage, 2 damage for a resource, plus 2 shield blank blank. Now, if we increase that cost by 1, we're now looking at Holdout Blaster, which is the same first 4 sides, 1, 2 for a resource, plus 2 shield, and now we've added a resource in place of one of the blanks. So essentially, for this 1 cost differential, we've gained ambush, redeploy, and a resource side. It's really hard to try to gauge how important these upgrades are, but like it's Holdout Blaster is no longer as good, and we'll get to why in a bit. But originally that's what we were looking at, and we were comparing all upgrades to. So once we got, you know, F11D was very similar. It lost the ambush, kept the redeploy, and it was 2 for a resource, plus 1, plus 2 resource, and then essentially 2 indirect. So like this was our bread and butter back in the day because it had 4 damage sides. And yeah. Then so like the lightsaber was one of the main ones because it was the only one with redeploy. So we were looking at 3 for a resource, plus 2 shield resource, and then a special for 2 damage. So now this is one of those interesting things where the DH to holdout progression wasn't any sort of increase in damage. But if we look at the DH to, the holdout to lightsaber increase, it's a huge burst differential, because essentially you can treat that special like it was in that 1 damage slot. So we got an increase of 2 damage overall in 2 locations. So instead of 1, 2 for a resource plus 2, we were looking at 2 damage unblockable, 3 for a resource plus 2. And then it still had maintained the shield and resource side. Sorry for this wiper thing. There was some light drizzle. It just built up. So the kind of expectation there was like, all right, well, the initial 1 increase, you know, just gave us a couple abilities plus a resource side. The second one removed the ambush, but gave an additional 2 damage. So it's like, okay, you know, this 1 resource for 2 damage thing's making sense. But if we look nowadays at the current options, you're going to see a vast difference. So bear in mind that it's really hard to gauge the value or hurt by a die that has resource costs on the sides. And we're also going to be looking kind of at non-redeploys, so it's kind of like, where do you balance the line? But if we look at the current 2-drops available, we've got, you know, X8, Night Sniper, we've got like LL30, Hidden Blaster, and now, so let's compare Hidden Blaster real quick. So the redeploy's gone, so we know that this is a decrease somewhere. But we're looking at 1 plus 2 plus 2. So it maintained the same type of damage sides, even though the resource costs turned into a modifier, which to me they're on the same level. Modifiers can be much worse because you need a base to go with them, but they can be much better in that they don't have a resource cost, so you don't need the resource. So like either way, you're kind of looking at requiring another die. A resource costed one will quite possibly require you to have a die showing resource, and then the modified will just require you to have a base. So those are the same. The shield and the disrupt seem to be roughly interchangeable for some of these upgrades. It seems like they've been going away from shields on the upgrades and going more towards disrupt on the guns, at least from some of the newer stuff, because X8 is similarly statted. You know, 1, 3 for a resource plus 2 disrupt resource. So once again, very similar, and that's ambush. The abilities do differentiate though, because Hidden Blaster can essentially do the equivalent to 1 damage when you cast it, and then X8 has the whole pay a resource to flip the die to whatever side you want. So it's kind of based on what you're looking for, but Hidden Blaster not having resource costs means you have a much smoother efficiency when you're just spending all of your money. Now if we kind of take into the whole like ambush redeploy thing again, we're looking at LL30. So now LL30 is a bit weird here because it's a 1/1 +2 shield, and then pretty much a focus for ranged, for dice with ranged sides. So if we once again go and compare this to the old, actually let's just compare this to Hidden Blaster because it's probably easier there. So instead of 1 +2 +2, we're looking at 1/1 +2. So we've lost the damage but gained a base side. Base sides tend to be worth more than modified or resource cost ones, but you can't have too many of them with decreased damage because it'll just cause you problems overall. But then we've got the shield back, which is akin to the holdout, and then we've lost the resource side in favor of the pseudo focus. So now the die still, or the card still maintains ambush and redeploy. So like it's relatively great there. But it's villain only, whereas I think every other of the cards we mentioned were all neutral. So it's kind of odd there that it gained villain and kind of had like a drawback in power. Normally speaking, when they make something specific like that, it'll have like this extra niche where they felt it was fine there, but they didn't want to give it to the other affiliation. So so when we look at these, it's like, all right, you know, this seems all fine. The ambush and the redeploys are great as far as like having a faster speed or just being safer overall. But when we get to like the 3-drops, they fall off pretty hard. So the only 3-drop we have access to with redeploy by itself, obviously we're not going to count Captain Phasma Blaster unless we have Phasma, is Canto Bite Pistol. So if we compare Canto Bite Pistol to Lightsaber, we're looking at 3 for a resource. Okay, those match up. We've got 2 damage. One's modified, the other one's indirect. So how you want to quantify that is choice. We've got a special that does 2 damage. So this is roughly the same, except one's unblockable, and the other one has the potential increase to be 3. And then I think it still maintained shield and resource. So Canto Bite is essentially the equivalent to Lightsaber. The only dilemma is that Lightsaber kind of has sucked for a long time, for anyone that's known. You can use it in very particular decks, or decks where you need to redeploy, but we're looking at pretty much a set 1 upgrade. And a lot of these other upgrades we got also look very similar to the set 1 upgrades. Now, if we go and we look at Melee instead, Melee doesn't have a 1-drop, so that's fine, because DH-17 in theory probably should have never actually been made. It was actually just too good, and I don't know how it stopped being run at some point, probably just because FN didn't really want those die sides. But oh yeah, probably should run that in FN 1000, by the way. Anyways, so going back, if we now compare things like the current upgrade set of, you know, what's played in the best decks, we still have some of those same guns being used, but I don't think we use them because they're amazing. I think we use them because they haven't made anything really better. So like Hidden Blaster is a progressive upgrade, so it's like X8. The ambush is relevant there, and it's much easier to use than like F11D. But we have stuff that's close up in proximity where I think we would have been happier with pretty much a better 3-drop upgrade as far as redeploy. So if we look at Melee, you're pretty much going to see this in every deck. That's blue Melee, and that's Ancient Lightsaber and Heirloom Lightsaber. So now, for Ancient Lightsaber, we've got 1/1 +3 shield and then a resource. And so it does not have any sort of ambush or redeploy. So you would think that there's a power level drop there. But that +3 is huge. None of those guns have access to a +3. And like the thing is that when you hit that +3, most of the other melee sides being used currently in the game are all base. So like if we ignore Maul's lightsaber, which is just different, we're primarily looking only at base sides, whereas a lot of the ranged characters have modified sides on their character cards, especially in like the 3-drop setups. So like sure, Mother Talzin doesn't have it anymore, but she's brand new. Stormtrooper, doesn't have it, but he still has like that pay side thing going for him. So we're still looking at, you know, 1, 2, and then 2 for a pay side and a resource and double blanks. He's more likely to not be able to use his die without a certain amount of rerolls, or unless you maintain the money available. Sienna, 1 + 2. Bala, 1 + 2. Greedo, he has the 1 and the 2 base, and then he also has a 2 indirect and a disrupt, but double blank, he's 11 points and 7 health. If we look at the melee characters that are commonly being used in that 12 to 15 point range, we're looking, you know, 10 or 11 health, 2 melee base sides, and like that 10 or 11 health is a huge difference. So like if you try to compare Ayla versus Talzin, it's really tough because the whole like focus and discard, I don't know how they value those when they create the character. But if Talzin had like a 10 health, a 10th health, like she would be so much better. 9 is really within that range of like really hard to protect through the second round. 10 health is much easier. You can often get into the third round with 10th health character with 1 or 2 health left. Whereas like Bala, Sienna, Talzin have much harder issues because everything's increased in damage. If Ancient gets, you know, rolled a couple times, like let's say someone plays Ancient and rolls like twice, we're looking at a 40% chance to have that +3 showing from Ancient Lightsaber. So where it's 2 out of every 5 rounds, that's going to show a +3. If you dedicate a third reroll to it, you're looking at like 50%. So 1 and 2 rounds, you're going to have a +3 showing, assuming you've rerolled 3 times. So, you know, essentially 1 upgrade, 1 piece of removal, and 3 rerolls, which really isn't outside of the realm of possibility or what could normally happen. And that's what we're looking at. Melee decks often don't even bother doing that because their dice are so consistent they can kind of resolve. So I'd say like 2 is usually the max amount of rerolls they get, unless they're just you know hitting pretty much blanks or sides they just don't want. And then so another 2-drop, once again no redeploy, Shoto Lightsaber. So this one kind of goes closer to like not F11D, but kind of as far as like stature. Like if we recompare this back to LL30 or Holdout, you know, it's got 1 + 1 + 2 shield resource. So it's very similar. It actually has a decrease in available damage, same as Ancient as far as like their individual sides. So that one's not packing a hugely powerful side like Ancient is, but the overall ability is completely filthy. As soon as you have that second upgrade down, if this is no longer 1-1-2, we're looking at like pretty much 2-2-3, assuming the opponent's put a shield and we've decided to take it off, or we're looking at, you know, a melee plus a shield, a +1 in a shield, a +2 in a shield, a double shield, or a resource in a shield. And if you kind of view the card like that, that seems obscene for a 2-cost weapon. Like, sure, in theory, you're not going to be able to go round 1 blue, and you may have some potential deck building restrictions, but blue's also the only deck that has a freaking tutor for its weapons. If we increase this to the next level with Heirloom Lightsaber, we're looking at 1, 2, 3 shield resource. If we compare this to Ancient Lightsaber, to Ancient Lightsaber, we've increased the second base side 1 damage, and then the +3 modified has become a base. Other than that, we're looking at the same as far as the die sides are concerned, but you've lost the whole healing ability and turned it into redeploy, which is perfectly fine because that progression there for the 1 resource meant that your die sides got marginally better, and you know you have healing factored in. I mean, you have the ability to shift the weapon now factored in. So it's like the progression they've made with blue melee weapons has been outright bonkers in comparison to the ranged weapons. And now this only really happened once EAW hit, because prior to EAW they just had massive issues really trying to land melee weapons. You had Makashi training, which was a +1/+2/+2 shield resource. But it had a cool built-in ability that was very good against the melee matches. You could kill your own melee die and kill one of theirs and exhaust it. So it's something that's really only fallen out of favor because Shoto is very similar. And if you kind of view it like, all right, how often are you going to play against matches with melee? Not super often. How big are those damages going to be? Probably 2 is what you'd be looking to hit. So even if you gave up only a 1, it's only really a 1 health increase because you gave up 1 damage to prevent 2 damage. So if you think of it like that, Shoto in general, just by activating with the blue upgrade would do that as is. It could give you the shield, prevent the 1 damage, and it gives you better attrition over time. The other thing is that these weapons allow you to kind of sell out, I guess is how I would say it, for removal. And what this means is, so let's say I go Ancient. Okay, you hit me for like 4. I go Shoto. So now, your 4, if you hit me again for the same 4, has become 3. And at any point in time now, anytime I start casting removal, your damage percentage drops exponentially because the further I get into rounds, the more shields I'm generating and preventing stuff. So if we're both doing 4 first round, it's like, okay, we both did 4. And now next round, I'm doing 4, you're doing 3. You're slightly losing the race. Now this happens again. Now you're at 12, I'm at 10. Realistically, it's not that simple. But the expectation is that each round, one person is going to at least remove a die from the opponent, and our damage should, in theory, be increasing unless I'm completely just decreasing yours. So, like, let's get to a situation with like Yoda Qui-Gon. So now Yoda has no damage sides, and you're thinking, all right, well, my damage is going to be lower, and that's correct to an extent. So, providing the opponent has no actual damage, your expectation with 2 of Yoda's dice is that you would, A, generate either 2 resources or 2 shields, and or the others, and focus, essentially, 2 of your dice to max damage. Now, in the situations where we have Ancients and or Shoto, or just one of them on the character, and we assume that the character has, you know, base 2 melee sides, then we're looking at 4 or 5 damage from that, and potentially 1 more from another. So, like, I'll just use Ahsoka for this one, just because I've been playing with her. In the situation for Ahsoka, you have really high odds to hit one of the base 2s. It's 55%. So if we include 1 reroll, we're at 70. We include, is that 70? Yeah. No, 70's wrong. 1 second. So we had 55% to start. 70% would be 1 additional die. So if we take another one, 80? No, it's 55 and 55. 55 and 45, about 22. Yeah, no, 80's right. So, assuming Ahsoka's rollout plus 1 additional reroll, we're 80% to hit 1 of the 2 damage sides. So if let's say in a given turn, I just cast Ancient on Yoda, roll out, I could potentially grab money and flip to a 3, cast removal, and have been able to hit for 5 to 7 or 4 to 7 based on the amount of removal being cast by the opponent, because the expectation is there that Yoda would have flipped the dice, or the one of Ahsoka's side and the Ancient to max. So we're looking at potential 7. If something crazy goes down, the opponent like sells out to do some like RI, Force Speed, Maz Vault, and they actually are lacking removal, you could potentially just go, okay, Ancient on Yoda, roll out, okay, get a resource, flip to a +3. Roll out Ahsoka, pay 2 to untap her. You've got really high odds to get the damage, even if you just get, like, let's say, a 2 and a resource, and you don't want to re-roll that because the odds are just real low. So you take the 5, okay, you take the resource, alright, you roll her out the second time. Now you've still got 4 cards in hand, and a really high chance to be able to hit for the 4 more. So you could have dealt 9 there if your opponent had no removal and did silly shit. Oh, we got plenty of time to talk. Jesus, I'm almost there. So like that's kind of why I'm enamored by the deck, because it's one of those things where I really want the ability to have yellow to see that the opponent has nothing, but then I also really want Ahsoka's untap, but I also need Yoda's resource building. So like or resource building and focusing. So like I can't get the best of all worlds. So for the most part, I'm just playing not knowing what access to removal people have. But if I play against very particular decks and they spend their money right at the beginning because they're relatively questionable, they just, you know, jam an Ancient down or whatever, then I know I have pretty high odds to be able to try to go smash that 11 damage in, or potentially have, you know, the 2 or want the Ancient mitigated. And I'm not super high to immediately max out on Ahsoka, but if I just sell out completely and don't even cast removal, pretty high chances to get the 11, but even then I don't need to. I can attempt to go for the 7 or 5 and still cast mitigation and gum them up a bit. So that's kind of where like I get the decision on how I want to try to do this round. And Villain is the one where you really don't want to do some of that because they have so much zero cost removal. Doubts and Hidden Motives could mess you up because they're able to operate freely, and whereas most hero cards require them to have resources available. But anyways, so that's kind of why I like that. So the thing is that these melee decks have really high odds to get this big damage out. If we look at the things like holdouts and stuff like that, so like let's say we go, you know, Aura Singh holdout roll. So Aura herself has pretty good odds to do that 5 to 6 damage range, assuming her die doesn't get mitigated. And like, okay, this is great. But on the upgrade die, what you're expecting to get there is much lower, because the resource side costed is really like a blank. And if we have to take a resource from one of our other characters, we're looking at a reduction in damage there. So like we could kind of call like that resource a 1, and then the 2 for a resource another 1. So like if you kind of view it like that, it's like, all right, well, you know, this makes sense. It's relatively fair. Excuse me. But the dilemma is that as you progress, the more you pay for resource sides, the worse it is, because you're having to reroll more often with less stuff. So like 1/1 plus 3 is fine, because when you're in those situations where you just don't want to reroll, you don't have to, and you can still get the value from the die relatively easily. So if you're missing a base side, you only have the +3 as a blank, and the resource side is a blank. I mean, sorry, the blank is a blank on like Ancient, but on all of the other 2-drop upgrades for range, you're pretty much looking at triple blank if you're missing a base side, and the resource. So like it progressively makes your upgrade much worse, and it's just one of those weird things. Like also the fact that Ancient can heal you too later in the game, so you smash it down at the beginning, you're taking some damage, you're doing some good stuff, and then it goes on the bottom to heal you too. And so like at the points where you start firefighting with removal, it changes up the damage specs very like a bunch. So like Shoto in that really just put people out of range to die when you're trying to fight them. And they do it pretty much for free, round after round. So it's one of those weird things. But like right now, Melee or Blue Melee just has access to the best upgrades in the game. Like the fact of the matter is you can. So you've got Shoto, Vibro, Ancient, if you want them, for melee decks, in the 2-drop range. In the 3-drop range, since we're already blue, we have access to Heirloom. If you don't have like as many blue guys, you just have like a single one, you have access to regular lightsaber. So those are essentially your redeploy options. In Hero, you have handcrafted Lipo and Obi Saber, which are very strong. For Villain, you've got Maul Saber. Yeah. But if we look at like the range stuff's just not nearly as good. We don't have a handcrafted light bow for range. We have Rocket Launcher, and Rocket Launcher hits for a lot. but it still costs a pay side. It's relatively hard to functionally pay for that every round. Lipo's 2 damage, 2 damage, 3 damage. And Rocket is 3, 3, 4, 4. So, like, they essentially took a reduction in damage for less blanks. And, like, it's kind of one of those things where, like, all right, well, let's think about this from Relby standpoint. We've got 2, 2, plus 3, 2 disrupt and a resource. And it's like, all right, well, this is much closer, and it has, like, the cool trick going. So, like, is Relby the answer? Maybe it's Phasma's Blaster that's the answer, because it's 1, 2, 3 for a resource, plus 3, and then a resource. And, you know, you have access to, like, the whole bait and switch thing. So, part of the dilemma is that the upgrades don't progressively give you advantages the same way that Melee does. So, you could try to look at the upgrades and see if you could do anything with it. You'd probably need about 6 of them, and then maybe, like, 3 3-drops. If you're really trying to get somewhere with it, to be similar to the current Melee decks. So, like, my expectation would be you'd probably be looking at, depending on your color bases, you're looking probably at DH to start. That's going to be one of your sets of 2-drops pretty much, because it's just too cheap and efficient. And then when you, like, it lets you play removal and your pay sides because you're stuck with those things. Probably like Hidden Blaster. And then probably LL30 if you're trying to stay away from pay sides, because that's just the most efficient. Then you'd range into your 3s of some frequency of, like, Phasma, Relby, Canto Bite, Rocket, depending on whether you need the redeploys or not. And, like, the dilemma is that you probably actually need the redeploys, because if you're gassing a 3-drop upgrade, are we playing, like, the 3 little guy deck? Because the 3 little guy deck dies a little too fast, and we're going to get into that in a second. But if you're playing, if you have, like, a 2-guy gun deck, let's say Boba Phasma, it's like, all right, well, you really need those higher damage sides. So looking into that stuff might be more efficient. But you also need to kind of fix your removal, which doesn't kind of exist. So, like, that, maybe that's what where we are looking at incorrectly with the gun decks. We're not running nearly as efficiency in the removals, because, like, we're pretty much running villain. So you're like, oh, Doubt, he doesn't like you, and he doesn't like you. Not much worse right now. It's just not always good because you have to be out first. And it's like a really, it's a less situational guard, but doesn't have as many broken tendencies. And I guess Phasma Blaster you can't even run in Hero. I think I don't know if Relby's Hero, or I think Relby's just villain. But, like, so, like, it's just really hard to run some of that stuff. So I'm going to take a look at it and see if we can come across anything that may be better from a range deck perspective. I just don't see it really beating the whole, like, mono blue setup. Overconfidences, Hero has Force Misdirection, villain has Hidden Motive and Doubts. But as I talk through this, like, it seems like it may be possible. We just have to adjust it more to not be as super gung-ho on the weapons. Definitely got some more time. So you've heard me pretty much talk about this range stuff. I'm going to look at some of the guys, but for the most part, Phasma's probably going to be the key red person. We just have to find another option. So, like, Boba's very good. Boba only has, like, that one range side, though. So I don't know if we really want that, if we end up with several modifiers. We're fine with it if we don't have a ton. And then we can just make adjustments to the removal package so that they pretty much stick a weapon and then start jamming down removal. And if they got extra money, they got extra money. If not, they don't. Because you can do stuff like well-connecteds to get through the extra money. But the big thing is I think, going to be efficiency, since you're looking at Boba, who's pretty much rocking 2/2/2, and Phasma, who's 1/2/2. And then you got Disrupt, Focus, and 2 resource sides between them. So, like, that may be possible. Like, you don't get the protection from Ancient and Shoto, but you do get the 0-cost protection for the early game. And I'll go take a look to see what's available for the removal. It's not amazing, but if we're faster, we still got Throne Room and Duggins. and I'll talk to Schnoo, because Schnoo messed with that stuff. But I think it would be interesting to see if we can get 3 drops in there and get better protection, because they do output enough damage. If we kind of think of it like the whole Boba 7 thing, which is probably just much better variation, because the melee setup is just more phenomenal. But Phasma can essentially just be considered way better than Seven Sister from a damage perspective. It's just Seven Sister is better from a control point, and control is very good. Plus, you get all the blue upgrades, which are just much better, and the blue removal. So let me think. So what was I talking about? So pretty much efficiency. So the thing is, like, you guys got to look at the upgrades and make sure that they're what you're running the upgrade for is about correct. And don't go gung-ho into, like, damage things. And what I mean by this is, so, like, the most efficient way to probably play the game is to, as a villain, jam a 2-drop down round 1, cast 0-cost removal, whether it's Doubt, Hadley, or Hidden Motive. You're going to have some form of 2 of those, because you're pretty much not going to be mono-red. So you're going to have, like, 4 0-drops, so the hope is to get one of those in your opening. What is it? 4 is 1 7.5. I can't even math that right now. So 2 to 15. Why is my brain not working? Yeah, my brain is holy shit. I was trying to do the math out of 100 there, and I don't know why it's not functioning in my head right now. If I said it was 15 out of 30, it would have been 50%. So 2 out of 15, we're looking at 13% per card draw. $13% per card draw. Every time we miss, it increases just a smidgen, but it also decreases because of the percentage that we have. We're going to call it 1/8 just for the sake of this. So we got 12.5, we got 87, so we're like 10, so 22. I'm going to call it like 50% because I don't have a calculator in my hand and my brain is not working. So I'd say we probably have, what, 80% if we had to mull real hard for a 0-drop, but we're looking for a weapon at the same time. So I'd say, like, only maybe about 1 in 3 games you would miss having probably the 0-drop in your opening, if you had 4 of those zeros available. So if you jam your 2-drop down, so now you're looking at 5 dice, 6 if you're on Boba 7th, and you can probably see where I do some of this in the what I'm talking about in the new Boba 7th deck that I built. So you have 5 dice, and now that the plan here is to mitigate with a 0 or just reduce damage. So hope to get out of this round having only taken like 4 or 5. The expectation is your opponent's not going to be able to nut roll into max damage. Like, let's even they hit both of Boba's 2s, that's 4. So then if they hit like a 2 on like a someone else and you doubt it or Hadley it, that's gone, and then maybe hit 1 on the other one. So like 4 or 5 is your expectation of to hope to get out of the round with, including like their upgrade. So jam your upgrade, smash a 0 to mess with one of the dice, get your like 5 damage in, 6 damage in depending on how it ends up going, and then in the subsequent round, now your expectation is to probably try to remove about 4 of their damage. If you remove 4 of their damage, they're probably at like the 6 or 7 range. Assuming they haven't sat there doing like disrupt or shields, which it could be much less. So now if you get out of this round doing 4 or 5 again, and you've only taken 3 or 4, you've reduced the damage again, so you now might be at the point where you could have killed a guy, and if you take their guy out, then you go into the next round with probably like 3 or 4 health left, and they're on their solo guy, so they've lost 2 of their dice. And this is kind of where your removal gets even crazier, because now they're looking to max out at like 5 damage, 6 damage, and if you cast a piece of mitigation or 2, you've dropped them down to 2. So now you've probably dealt your 4 or 5 again, and then stop them up to like 2 or 3, so your guy is just teetering on the brink of death whilst you're doing this. So like this is where you get like the max amount of efficiency through crushing people, because if they sat there jamming upgrades, so now let's say instead of the removal we went jam upgrade 1, jam upgrade round 2. The thing here is that first upgrade, when you cast it, the opportunity cost is essentially that you're gonna hope to get to use it 3 times. So I'm gonna use Ancient's dice. Actually, let's not use Ancient. Let's use like a Hidden Blast or something. So if you use Hidden Blaster 3 times, your expectation is like it gets you like a resource 1 time, it gets you like 2 damage 1 time, and then we'll just call the other one 1 damage. So it'll have got you 3 damage and a resource at the cost of 2. So essentially you'll have traded 1 resource for 3 damage because you got to use it over 3 rounds. And it's like, okay, well, this makes sense. But the upgrade you cast on round 2, you'll only got to use like twice. So now let's say they jammed a second upgrade down. They've got 2 damage from it, and then they got a resource on it. It's like, all right, this is barely feasible. But in situations where they kind of had to take what they could get because you were like killing their one other guy, it's much harder. So if they ended up getting, 2 damage, 1 damage, they got 3 damage for 2, you're like, okay. But if it's one of those weird situations where, because you speed kill a guy and kill a guy in round 2 and reduce 2 of their dice, potentially 3 if that's the guy they put the upgrade on, they wouldn't have got the max value from their resources, which kind of means that they got set back behind. I don't know if I can explain this in any sort of other like better way, but just kind of think of those people just think when you're playing that game and that guy has like 7 damage on whatever character, and then he casts a new upgrade that's not like Ancient, because that heals. He casts an X8 on the guy and then rolls out and like has no resources left. It's like, wait a second, like if you have this other guy available, why is it going on this dude? It's gonna die. Whereas if the character had like 4 health left and they maintained it up for removal, they could either A, threaten you with removal, or actually B, have it and use it. When they jam out all their resources, you kind of know the limited options that they have, and you can play around it and actually go kill their guy. Especially if they get left with 1 or 2 dice on the table. Those are the games where you pretty much always crush the person, and you're just like that idiot. So, like, you got to kind of think, like, what's the value of this upgrade being cast? And this is where stuff like Binds gives you that progressive benefit over the course of the game that the gun decks don't have. And this is why, like, I'm big on blue right now and trying to learn it and understand it, because I just didn't bother playing blue the entire time before. But hopefully I'm going to get through some more of this. We're going to talk about, like, upgrades and probably just not casting upgrades at the end of the game, unless it's in, like, a 1v1 situation, you're extra flush with resources, and either you have no need to cast a removal or you need to get the extra 2 damage in, blah, blah, blah situations. But I hope this was of some use to some of you guys kind of thinking about these different things and the upgrades in general, because I see a lot of people running like these weird 2-drop upgrades that don't do much, or just kind of think like why Datapad's not super amazing unless you have chock full of resources. So hopefully this makes sense. Let me know if you guys have any questions, concerns, thoughts. Like, feel free to comment in this stuff, or if you comment in the YouTube videos, it'd probably make more sense because I can respond, and then other people could see it. Whereas if you respond in chat for something that's like really tied into this, people probably wouldn't see it much later. But do either or. I don't care. It's on you guys. But yeah, let me know. And I'm not gonna say comment and subscribe because you guys are ready to do that. I don't know. Honest Graphic reporting out. Deuces.